We have the pleasure of welcoming Kevin today to our interview series Leaders Hum. I'm Aishwarya Jain from the peopleHum team. Before we begin, just a quick intro of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work with AI and automation technologies. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest, Kevin Grossman is the Talent Board President and Board Member responsible for the Candidate Experience Awards worldwide. Kevin is also a well-known blogger, known for his HR business blogs. He's also the author of the book Tech Job Hunt Handbook, inspiring candidates worldwide and preparing organizations for the best candidate experience. Welcome, Kevin. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time. So, Kevin, sure. I want to begin with the first question. If you could tell us something, a little bit about the Talent Board Candidate Experience Awards.
Sure. So Talent Board is a nonprofit research organization that was founded in 2011, and it's all about elevating and promoting a quality candidate experience. So every year we do survey research with hundreds of employers from around the world in North America, EMEA, APAC, and now Latin America as well. And they first self-assess what they're doing in recruitment from pre-application to onboarding, and then they target a population of their own job candidates, most of whom are those who didn't get hired at the end of the day, and then ask them about their feedback about the hiring and recruiting process. And then we aggregate all that information, we release it in research reports, articles, webinars, workshops, hopefully one of these days in-person events again. But for now, we're doing virtual events, and that's what the program's all about.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that's quite a boat full of knowledge for everybody, and I'm sure that's very useful to a lot of HR professionals out there. So, Kevin, you're a blogger, you're an author, and you cover a wide range of topics, starting from responsible parenting to HR business and personal leadership. How do you keep your interests and passions so varied?
You have to just really continually educate yourself. So my philosophy, like many of my mentors that I have today, consider themselves to be lifelong students. We're always learning something new. We should always be experiencing. I'm an avid reader. And also having 2 children, there's no end to the adventure of being a parent as well. So, and I think that because of that, that keeps my interest in a lot of different things. And I also have learned a lot of valuable life lessons in both work as well as in personal, and they all intertwine and overlap anyway. I don't think there's not any specific delineation between either one. And how we carry ourselves, how we live our lives, and how that impacts those around us is very important to me and my wife and those who work with me and for me as well. So I think I'm always learning, always. And I'm going to learn something new with you today on this podcast. And we did before we even started the podcast. We were talking about what's going on in our world today, which is with the healthcare crisis. So that's really the bottom line for that.
Absolutely. I think learning is, it's very important in continuing to have a very productive and a purposeful life. And, I did catch on to that bit of you being an avid reader. So, would you like to share what you're reading now and, what is it all about?
Sure. Actually, so to give you some context, I read a good selection of fiction and nonfiction, but right now I'm reading some nonfiction and actually rereading something that I'm also a big music fan too. I'm kind of a self-taught drummer and practicing again since now I have the time at home to do that. as well. But I'm a big fan of lots of kinds of music, but particularly rock and roll music. And so there's a band out of Canada called Rush,
Mhm.
and the lyricist and the drummer, who unfortunately just passed away in January of brain cancer, he's also been a big avid traveler, which my wife and I are also, or at least we were before where we're at now. And so anyway, long story short, he has written a series of nonfiction books about his life, his journeys, his travels. And this one that I'm reading now is called Ghostwriter, Healing on the Traveling Road. And it's about, in the mid 90s, he lost his daughter in a single car accident. And she was coming back from college. And then 6 months later, he lost his wife to cancer. So he was pretty devastated. And so this book is about him dealing with that and healing himself, riding a motorcycle 55,000 miles across North America all the way down to South America and back again. So, and I'm I'm an avid fan of his philosophy, his sensibilities. So, in this book, I wanted to read it again right now because of the global devastation that we're experiencing. It's not just, it's one thing is the healthcare crisis and the impact that it's having on communities local to our nations. You're in India and I'm in the United States, and those who are getting very sick and unfortunately those who are dying, but also the economic fallout that we're seeing. Just it's so much so fast, millions of people suddenly out of work, and it's overwhelming, I think, to a lot of us when we try to like even grapple with that in our own local communities, and anything that we can. So I'm rereading it again, because just to get myself in that mind frame of we can heal from this. We can all come back from the devastation. We are resilient as humans, and that's why I'm rereading it now. So
That's wonderful. Sounds like a very interesting book.
yeah,
And
I think so.
right. And yes, I think, as humans, we've always come back from whatever we've been. We continue to survive and we continue to thrive. So
Right.
I think, this again will be a very, very, it's going to be a lot of learning as to how you're going to cope up with things, and
Right.
especially at workplaces, right? When you talk about workplaces, recruiters are going to go through a lot of change, right? So
Yes.
what is your viewpoint on this? If you could also give a few tips to our viewers who are also candidates, how would they get noticed by dream companies, or how would they now, because I think there's going to be a splurge in the number of candidates suddenly. The graduate students of this year are going to look out for jobs, and all the companies are going to have so many options open to them suddenly, right? So how is it that they should like approach them, and what kind of tips would you give them to uncover these opportunities?
Well, let me start with the candidate side, because whether they are new graduates coming into a much different new world that we're all in now, or individuals who have been laid off or furloughed and most likely won't be hired back. And we also have to consider are they individuals that were working at smaller businesses, which make up the bulk of business, especially in the United States, but potentially globally as well. And then there's the mid-size and larger organizations that may be hiring. I think as a person who is saying, wow, I need to find a job, obviously, if I was an individual who was working in retail, hospitality, potentially even the airlines right now, the list goes on of those industries that have been really just torn to shreds right now because of this full stop on doing the things that we used to do, of being close together and traveling and going to restaurants. And I think they're going to need to look what are the other services organizations that are hiring. I mean, obviously grocery chains are, as far as I know and what I've been reading, they're still hiring and actually need folks because but there's a risk associated with that too, that you're going to be potentially exposed to COVID-19 because you're going to be in the public sector. But if you have customer service skills, sales skills in that retail context or that hospitality context, I think you want to look to those companies, industries, businesses locally that are hiring, that you could still, I know there's also food delivery, grocery delivery, and food delivery, although that's kind of fits and starts right now in the States, at least, because of the one company called Instacart that employs a lot of those contract delivery workers are on strike right now, at least as of earlier this week. But that said, look to those parts of the service industry that are still hiring. Do your research, go on LinkedIn, read the news to a certain degree, especially business sections, who is actually hiring, and see what kind of skills are applicable that you could potentially do that. Now you're going to be applying for those jobs with a lot of other people potentially too, but that's one level of that. But there are also, obviously, healthcare is, for reasons due to COVID and coronavirus, are completely ramping right now, and logistics, supply chain. So there are industries that are hiring, and there are jobs that are out there, but you got to be able to, how do I take what I know and what I do, and how can I apply that to this role? Because there are a lot of transferable skills in the services sector, in the industry. Look to mentors. Find somebody that you trust, whether it's a family member or a friend or a peer or a colleague you used to work with, and run these scenarios by them. Ask them what they think. Coach each other. If you know somebody in HR and recruiting, for that matter, reach out to them and say, can you help me right now? Can you help me? How do I make myself transferable? And I know a lot of us in the HR recruiting space, whether they're on the solution providers as well as service providers, as well as practitioners in their companies that are still moving forward, they're trying to do their part there too, to help guide and mentor individuals so that we can get folks back to work. Because again, it's a lot really quick, and we're still not done. April is going to be probably even more devastating to certain industries. So that's my recommendation for candidates. I mean, obviously recruiting if you're in an industry or a company that is full stop, hiring freeze, and even having to lay off and furlough, unfortunately, what tends to go first is recruiting, sales, and marketing. When you're in that kind of a full stop situation and just keeping just a few people. So, but there's an opportunity for recruiting teams that are still trying to stay alive and keep moving forward, even if they've put a hiring freeze in place. This is an opportunity to look at process. Maybe there's things now that we can improve as it relates to the candidate experience. I mean, I would argue that how you communicate now with your candidates and your current employees, who are also candidates in their own right, even if they're employed with you still, how you communicate with them, how you treat them now, will impact your business and your brand for years to come. And because everybody is hyper aware, stressed, and of what's going on. So this is an opportunity to improve your communications to your candidates and your employees. Look at your process. Maybe this is an opportunity to do an inventory of all the systems and technologies you have in place. Are they working to full capacity? Is there full utilization of them? Or what can you do to better maximize that with your tech partner right now? If you don't have to start cutting contracts and cutting costs, strengths? What can you do to maximize that so that when we come out of this, you're in a better position to quickly ramp again with your company, leveraging your technology and your improved processes and your communications. Look at your job descriptions, the work you can do on your career site during this time. Also, are you sharing on your career site what's going on with COVID-19 and how you're dealing with it as an organization, and letting I think there's too many companies still potentially that are worried about what to talk about. But I think right now we gotta talk about it all. So if this is what you're doing at your organization, sorry, we're having a hiring freeze right now. Thanks for your application, but we're just not hiring anybody. And this is why, and this is also what we're trying to do. Be transparent about it. This is the time. It's not the time to hide. And those are my recommendations for the candidates as well as the talent acquisition recruiting teams and HR.
Right. And, I think, as you said, transparency would be very, very important, especially right now, because there would be a lot of candidates kind of really looking to get recruited. And, I think they're really hoping that they might land up with a good job right now. So keeping that channel open and, taking for the recruiters, taking stock of the situation of their recruitment process, it would be a good time to do that. So
yes,
if we talk generic, right, on a generic level, let's remove the COVID situation. Now, a candidate's experience has a lot of stages, right? So what do you think, which is the most important stage in that whole recruitment cycle, and where do you think most recruiters lack, and how can they improve themselves?
Well, my answer is going to be all of them are important. I mean, I say that seriously because I think, it's candidate experience is 24/7. It's all the time. It's anytime I interact with the company I'm currently working with, again, as we're all perpetual candidates, or at the company I'm interested in and I'd like to work at, all those things impact my overall perception of that business and that brand, and how I'm treated and how I'm communicated with throughout impacts my perception of fairness in the process. So what I would argue is that, and what we see in our data every year, the biggest gaps, or I'll call perception gaps, between what you think as an employer you're delivering in recruiting versus what the candidates actually experience, the biggest gaps are in the front end. So when I'm researching you, when I apply, and then even in the screening and interview phase, and when you're telling me that you're going to reject me, those are the biggest gaps in overall perception that we see. Most companies, when you get to the point when you're actually making offers to individuals and you're going to hire them, most companies are all in at that point, and they're investing much more because obviously you want to hire these people. That's why you're making offers. So the front end of the process, and what we see every year in our data and our research, is that communication and feedback are really the true backbone differentiators. Candidates, unless you're in the space that we're in, right? Technology, the HR technology space, candidates don't care what your technology stack is. Don't care one bit. What they care about, are they being engaged from the beginning? Are you answering their questions? Are you communicating with them? Are you being clear about expectations about what's going to happen next after they apply, before they apply, once they're screened and interviewed? And is there definitive closure? So when I apply at an organization, and if you're at a company that has any volume at all, and you have obviously you're using technology to screen, and you're capturing those in an applicant tracking system, whatever the system is, those that are applying, if the message that you're sending to them as an automated message says, "Thank you very much for applying. If you're qualified, we'll be in touch," is almost as worse as if you didn't say anything at all. Because most companies aren't following up. That's it. That's the only automated message those people are going to get. Now, in fairness to employers, it's also a daunting task, right? Because if you have any volume of hiring at all, it's an uphill battle. You're going to have always many people that are applying, and especially today, probably applications are going to go up for those companies who are still hiring. So it's a lot, and it's hard to be definitive. But if the message instead said, "Thank you very much for applying. We're not going to pursue you at this time, but here's some other opportunities," or check back and try again in a few months, but you're being clear about it. Nobody wants to be rejected, but most people who apply aren't ever going to be qualified, not enough to get screened. And as long as there's also a delay, not too long of a delay, make sure if once I apply, if I hit submit and you automatically send me a rejection note, that's not good. If you give me a few days and then tell me within a week, definitively, we're not going to pursue you, but thank you very much for your time, I'm going to be bummed. I may even feel like you didn't even look at my application, but at least it's clear. And we know in our own data that when things are clear and definitive and expectations are set correctly throughout the process, I'm more likely to rate you higher than I would otherwise. Every single year around the world, that's what we see. So that alone, just that part of the application process where most people research you and apply, and that's as far as they're ever going to go. They're never going to go any farther. That's going to be critical to improve that part of your communication, even if most of it's all automated. It's fine, but just be clear with it. So communication and feedback are probably the backbone differentiators, expectation setting, being more transparent. And then also, and all those things, those all help to improve the overall level of perceived fairness from the candidate. And that's what's key at the end of the day. It's not, then you can aspire to have happy candidates, but that doesn't matter really. What matters is that even if there's a negative skew in their overall rating, as long as you were clear throughout and told them, sorry, we're going to pass, whatever stage that is, that's exactly what you need to be doing. And whether that's 10 candidates or 10,000 for any, for the larger companies, that we know are getting thousands of applications a month for that matter. That's just, and those are easy things for companies to do now, especially if they have a hiring they can clean up those communications now going forward. But for any company who feels like not replying or keeping it really vague at all, I would argue that we see in our data that actually can eat away at your brand over time.
So it's really about communication and communicating, more like over communicating to the candidate and then making sure that the feedback is correct, so that
Yes.
there could be a possibility that the person actually at a later point in time might reapply to your organization with the right skill set. So you don't want to leave them with the impression that you're not important to us, and we want to kind of give you the right experience. Otherwise,
Right.
the candidate would probably not come back or ever recommend it to another friend.
And by the way, that's ultimately the key. What we're helping companies understand every year, and the industry understand, is that there is a potential definitive impact on your business and your brand that will determine whether or not a candidate, external or internal, decides to either ever apply again, ever refer others, or make purchases if and when applicable, especially for consumer-based companies. Their experience can and does define and impact what they'll do going forward. And we ask those questions every year. And we actually call it, on the negative side, we call it the resentment rate. So candidates who say, I am never going to do anything with you again at all. You treated me bad, or whatever their perception was, that's the resentment rate. And on the average right now, it's the highest in North America. And followed by EMEA, Asia Pac, and then Latin America, which we've only done research for 1 year with a small group, but we'll see how that changes over time. On the other hand, though, there is 25% on the average. It varies from region to region, but 25% of the candidates who say they had a great experience overall, and they're willing to increase their relationship. And 90% on the average of all the candidates in our research don't get hired. So if that's the case, and there's that many people that say they had a great experience, that's a positive thing to think about. It's not always about the bad. There are those candidates who don't get hired who are still willing to do something, whatever that means, whatever it is for them. And usually we're talking about applying again or referring. That's usually the main thing. But it also could mean whether or not I go to your I make a purchase from your business, or I influence a friend to say, you know what, you need to go buy that stuff. And that's the difference. That's really what, again, the business impact that we do measure and see every year.
Right. I think, you're right. It's really about how we give them a complete holistic experience so that they walk away with not an impression that they were not valued, but they walk away when they really feel uplifted. And, even though they might get rejected, at least they walk away with that feeling that, yes, I was treated with all fairness and I had a great candidate experience. And that is what they will walk away with.
Exactly.
And also in the candidate engagement part, wherein we see a lot of drop-offs between the periods that we offer them and the periods that they finally get hired. There is a lot of time in between, and then when we are kind of interviewing them and a decision takes a lot of time, there's a lot of gap, a lot of days that we spend on an application, and then there are so many drop-offs that you see. How do you kind of increase that rate, and how do you make sure that these drop-offs are lower?
So time is always a factor in recruiting, and if you're doing high volume hiring, like maybe a lot of hourly positions that are it's a lot of repetitive tasks at your organization that you want to hire for on a regular basis, and then the roles that they perform, then you want to keep that pipeline moving as quickly as possible, because you're going to have those that are going to leave. So whatever your churn rate is, of how many people actually, what your retention rate is for that group, you want to keep that moving very quickly. So there's not, there shouldn't be a lot, really huge lengths of time. I mean, especially prior to what we're in now, there were even hourly employees, even contractors for that matter, had a lot more choice, right? And so it was hard. Some local businesses or businesses that employ a lot of hourly workers were also struggling because there's a lot of opportunities for those individuals to go elsewhere or to choose. And that's why we saw a lot higher levels of what we'll called candidate ghosting, right? It's one thing for the employer to ghost the candidates and just not ever get back to them. But we've had, up until now, we had a lot of, candidates that was starting to happen more often, even for hourly positions. They just wouldn't show up on their first day because they got something else. That's different. It's going to be different now, but I think that, so time is a factor for professional hires. It's just the same. Hiring managers that have a tendency to want to hold on to candidates, or recruiters like, oh, let's wait a couple of weeks and see how these ones pan out. I mean, the point is, if you're letting them know why you're doing, I mean, what's going on, like, listen, we're in the process of reviewing other candidates, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks, and then you do what you say, that's one thing. So that goes back to expectation setting, but the more that it gets strung out, and I would argue that even for employers, when their candidates, aren't going to be in the buyers, it's not going to be a buyer's market for them anymore because of the sheer volume of people that are going to be available to work. But that doesn't mean that you just keep everybody waiting either, because I think that it's still going to affect your brand in the long term and the near term if you choose to just string people along, not respond. Your volumes may go up, but that doesn't mean that you don't stop communicating with them and set expectations. And my whole thing is that if the person's just not going to be qualified for the role, then there's no reason not to disposition them and to tell them that. just why are you waiting? And you know, I mean, I know that's going to vary for a lot of different types of roles and stuff, but it doesn't. So time's the factor here. So that's the way you prevent that kind of a drop off. Is again, and it just goes hand in hand with the communication and the time factor. Even today, because you may have again a significant volume of applicants applying for jobs that are much more finite for now. But time's still a big factor, and it potentially can come around again on the negative side for you or the positive side if you're being clear, concise, and contracting the time. You don't need, it doesn't have to be weeks and weeks and weeks and months. And your systems that you have in place, your technology platforms that communicate with your candidates, you have different rules that you can and features that you can set up and trigger points of when communications are sent, whether it's activated by the recruiter or automated. You control all that. So there's no excuse for either A, not responding at all, or going weeks and weeks and then deciding to, now we're going to disposition these 50 candidates weeks later. And even if they're still scrambling to look for work, they're going to remember the fact that you didn't get back to them for weeks. So it's just, that's why it's so ultra, ultra hyper critical now more than ever to keep time in mind, communication, and I would even argue hyper personalization is where we're moving with systems like yours and others and other folks that work with us on the Candy side, our sponsors, etc. Hyper personalization is still where we're going, and that's really how you can, and that's going to help you. The more automation can help you do that, to keep things very clear with every single person that's in your system, wherever they're at in the pipeline at any given time, and helping to empower the recruiters. So there's still going to be the human touch over here, but that's only for this many people that are being screened and interviewed. Everybody over here is going to be more and more automation. So how can you personalize that more and more? That's where we need to go.
Absolutely. And that was actually my following question, talking about tech and AI. But I think you've already answered that so beautifully. And, when it comes to AI and tech, have you seen an increase in adoption of technology in your career lifetime? And do you really see organizations, very proactively using it to improve their candidate engagement and experience?
More so, yes. I think a lot of mid-sized to larger organizations that have implemented AI-related recruiting technologies, chatbots, screening tools, sourcing tools, even matching algorithms. I think that the consensus is that when it works, and I think the technology, the computing power, and the algorithms are better than they've ever been, and I think that it is working more and more. And it's actually, again, we have to. This level of automation is definitely helping companies to be more efficient and to focus, to be able to empower recruiting to the point where that human interaction is that much better at the end of the day. Yes, there's always going to be some displacement anytime something new like this. And I know those who, human sourcers have been worried for a while but I think right now we still have to run the robots. So I think a lot of individuals, even recruiters and sourcers, are like that. When they get over that hump of they're worried, it actually is helping them improve their jobs. And we see, so I am seeing more adoption, and good case studies that are coming out. I've done a few of my own podcasts for the Candies, as we call it, that highlight some companies that are definitely seeing results of leveraging smart technologies, AI-related technologies. Candidates themselves, we ask now a couple of questions in our research. How do they feel? Did they engage a chatbot when they were researching, and did they engage the chatbot when they were applying? Since those are the main things they're gonna have activity with.
Right.
And we see higher positive ratings in our research from those that have that interaction, because also it's filling a communication gap where there was little to none before. Most of the time there was not. I mean, if you had human recruiters answering candidate questions, maybe you did it a few times a week, you manage your social channels, maybe that's happening, but to do that all the time with a lot of repetitive questions, that's where this technology is one of the areas, at least, it's really helping to improve. So we see the higher ratings in that. And the companies who, in our research every year, part of our namesake, again, is the Candidate Experience Award. So even though it's an anonymous and confidential research program, companies every year who have the highest ratings in our research, then we celebrate them and we give them awards. And those are the ones that we tout publicly that are listed on our website. But more and more of them, not all of them, but more of them are expanding their use of AI-related technology. I'm generalizing right now, but that's what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting to hear, and I agree with you. Add-ons like a chatbot, and that's something we've done in peopleHum as well. We've integrated a chatbot into the platform, so I think it just enhances and makes the entire process easier and much more efficient, and you kind of reduce the manual tasks of the HR professionals, so they can just think about the higher order work, and they don't really have to go into the grunt of just doing all those manual tasks. And I think that's where tech and things like chatbots can really help.
Oh, right. Yes. Agreed.
That makes a lot of sense. So, and just to kind of touch upon certain aspects of how do you treat candidates correctly. So, do you see any bias in treating candidates with respect to inclusion, diversity, any kind of bias?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, yes, we're biased creatures as humans. So, I mean, we're hardwired that way. We learn that over time. It's hard not. We're not bias free. We try to make our systems as bias free as possible, although they're not. They won't ever be completely bias free, not in the near future. But I think so. There's still bias, obviously, in recruiting and hiring. I think there's a lot of organizations that whether it's blinding resumes, using the latest screening technologies, AI-related technologies, to help them shortlist the candidates that they can then review. Reducing the amount of bias in their job descriptions. There's a lot of tools out there today that helps. Tell Vista is one, for example, and many others, but that are helping to remove and that the biased language in your job descriptions, on your career site, in your communications, even for that matter. And I think they're, again, just generally speaking, I think more companies are more conscious of that, of the bias in hiring, and have done a variety of things in their processes as well as the technologies they implement to mitigate that and reduce that as much as they can. So they're not going to get it all the way out, but I know that they are more conscious of it now than ever before. And whether that's making, and there are a lot of programs, right, to target other ethnicities, other cultures, more females. I have 2 girls at home, and we encourage them to do all sorts of things, including science and math and technology and no limits. And companies are trying to make sure that are they being truly inclusive for all those individuals, transgender individuals, whatever your background is, and are you truly being inclusive, so that at the end of the day, it's about does this person not only have the immediate skills and experience to do this job, but do they have the potential to do this job? And I think that's another thing that some AI-related technologies, job simulation, job tryout kinds of assessments that are on the market. Does this person have the potential to thrive in this job, regardless of their background. And so there's a lot out there that help companies do that. So yeah, I think we are mitigating bias better than we ever have, but we still got, there's still a lot of work to do.
Of course, there's always a lot of scope for improvement. But yeah, I think I agree with you. We're trying to mitigate it to a certain level, and that's helping us recruit better, I think. So thank you so much for that answer. I think I've exhausted the questions that I had in mind. I just want to ask you if there are any other important sound bites that you would like to leave for our viewers.
I would just, of course, will say that, as I said earlier, now is the time to make sure that your communication strategy with your candidates as well as your employees is as clear and as concise and transparent as you possibly can be with everything that's going on right now. How you're managing the healthcare crisis at your own organizations. If you have to furlough and lay off, how are you communicating with them on that? What are you trying to do to help them find some other work somewhere else? If you're an industry or company that's hiring still, how are you communicating that to the market and to the candidates, to the employees? And are you trying to take a lead on and helping those that now are looking for work? I think, and that includes, measuring and asking for candidate feedback as well as employee feedback. So I would recommend, whether you do it yourself internally, or you participate in a benchmark research program like ours, where you actually can compare yourself against companies big and small across industries, confidentially and anonymously. The time is to still do that, especially if you are staying alive as a company. Even if you're freezing hiring right now, how this is the time to continue to ask for that feedback and to communicate what you're doing as a business to those individuals. So that would be my recommendation, is that we have to be able to balance what's happening as a healthcare crisis globally, as well as how do we keep moving forward? How do we, as businesses, how do we stay alive? How do we get we get these people back to work at some point? How do we do all this? And government intervention aside, just whether you're a for-profit, public sector, or nonprofit like we are as a research organization, how can you contribute to helping others right now is super critical. And again, communicating with your candidates and your employees is extremely important right now.
Absolutely. That's wonderful messaging, Kevin. So thank you so much for a lovely interview. I've had a lovely conversation with you.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, and it's been a complete pleasure hosting you. I hope we stay in touch. And
sure.
Yes, I'll definitely send out the links to you on YouTube, and when we put it out on the podcast, that would be really wonderful to keep in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time. Stay safe and take care of your near and dear ones, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.